if you would go to your menu for your Zoom control panel and look for the little icon that says participants, because we're going to be doing something called Critter or Not. For those of you not, actually, I just learned this from the email that Charlotte sent out. This is everyone's favorite quiz. So I was not aware of that, but we have a little activity that we do from time to time here on Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. And in order to respond to it, I'm going to direct your attention to your participants menu, where if you click on that, you'll see below the list of people who are on the Zoom meeting, there are a few little tools that you can use. And one is a checkbox that says, or a check button that says yes, and another is an X that says no. So those are what we're going to use to reply to the question at hand, which is, as I say, the question of critter or not. The way this works is we're going to be presenting a series of photographs and descriptions of things that either we've seen ourselves or have been sent to us. And you're going to evaluate each one. And if you think you're looking at something that's a critter, in other words, an insect or a mite or a spider, some other kind of arthropod, a mollusk, or a vertebrate animal, then you're going to check the green button. If you think that it's anything else, so a disease, a fungus, an abiotic problem, some human-induced situation, then you're going to check the red X button. And keep track of your score as we go, and we'll do a little poll at the end to see how people did. In the unlikely event that anyone's doing this as a group today, choose your designated secretary so that when you decide as a group what your answer is going to be, that person can then record what the answer is. All right. Our first situation here, this actually came through the Ask an Expert module, which didn't give the county, unless, Matt, do you know what county this came from?
I think this one was from Durham County.
Okay, I couldn't find it there in the documentation, but you can see this strange sort of line on the upper surface, and then underneath some kind of structures there on the underside of the leaf. So using your button there, indicate if you think this is a critter or not. Let's see. Just checking down the line here. It seems like there's a vast majority here who say that it is a critter. And
yeah. Well, good. We should have asked what was the critter. I think that would have been even more difficult, obviously. But yes, it is a critter. I'm assuming Mike wants to turn it over to me for this one for an explanation. But these are leafhopper eggs. You typically don't see the leafhopper eggs of the very small ones, but these very large ones are basically going to be one of the larger sharpshooters, like something closely related to glassy wing sharpshooter, or some of the other very large, and large for leafhopper being about, third of an inch long. These are the larger leafhoppers that insert their eggs in a row in the plant tissue. So in that previous photo, you saw the upper side, it just kind of bulged a little bit. And on the underside, you can see where the actual eggs are, which is kind of common for those larger sharpshooters.
And keep that phrase in mind, the sharpshooter leafhoppers, because I may mention those a little bit later when I'm talking about one of our most common disease situations that we see this time of year. So moving along, here is a photograph. Looks like it could be a satellite image of some faraway place, but in fact, these are very small structures in a mulched bed at a garden taken on Sunday. And you can see there are small, round, flattened objects inside of the larger ones. So, critter or not?
And I just cleared it before, I think right after a couple people voted. So if you don't see your vote, vote again. So somebody says missed the instructions on how to participate. If you click on the participants list, you should see a checkbox, a check and an X buttons. And if you just click whichever one, if it check if it's a critter or some kind of animal structure, something like that, and X if it's not, if it's some fungus or some disease or something else.
All right, thank you, Matt. We'll give the newly instructed another moment or two to register their responses.
And please make sure you're not drawing on the pictures to obscure what people are seeing. If you please don't annotate right now. Thank you.
So we have 104 no's and 5 yeses. So we're not fooling anybody here today, Matt.
I know, it's no fun.
So this was, I'm going to clear those responses now. This was a bird's nest fungus growing in that mulch. I would say it's probably the species Crucibulum laevae. We have more than one kind of bird's nest fungus here. And those little egg-like structures are actually the peridioles, the spore-bearing structures of the fungus itself. This is a saprophyte. It's not doing any damage to any plants. It's a curiosity when people see it, but it's just decaying the organic matter there. All right, in that same park, just maybe 100 yards or 200 yards away from that last photograph, there is this, I'm sorry, this is a little bit fuzzy here, but a wild grapevine with this stuff kind of hanging from it. So, critter or not? All right, while people are thinking about that, I see a message. Tom Gale says, still seeing first slide example. Tom, if you could specify exactly what it is that that slide looks like that you're seeing, or if that's changed now. Might give folks just another second or two here. I'm really happy with the response rate. We've got a lot of people participating in the quiz this time, with over 100 responses each. That's wonderful. And right now, with 120 responses in, 92 yeses and 18 nos. So, Matt, I'll let you talk about this. Well, I'll talk about the blue glove there. It's like nowadays you carry gloves with you, and it came in handy to not handle directly that slime on the plant there. But Matt, take it away.
Yeah, that was surprising to me because I wasn't sure if you were going to be posting a questionable one. I don't know if it was some exudate from the plant, because that was actually a very large mass of spittle bugs. So probably, as you see, there's a couple there. There were probably several in there, I'm assuming.
I didn't find a lot because it was just so massive.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that's interesting. So spittle bugs do produce this spittle mass, and that was so much that it was actually looked like it was dripping down, the liquid even. Usually the froth masses are a little bit smaller, but what they do is they actually produce this out of the rear of them from their digestive tract, and it's basically a way to hide them from predators and parasitoids, although there actually is a type of Drosophilid fruit fly that's larvae parasitize these. So they're not completely safe, but those spittle masses are basically harmless. You can wash them away or just leave them be. They'll turn into little frog hoppers or spittle bug adults later on. And they don't really hurt the plants much. They're xylem feeders. They feed on very low nutrient types of sap.
And there was also a goldenrod in the same area of the woods that had some spittle, but more normal looking amount.
Yeah, that one was surprising. That was a lot.
So this is a terrible picture, but it was hard to get because I was looking up through the canopy and backlit by the sky, but this hornbeam down by a creek with these dark circles and the backlit leaves with kind of darker centers to them. So I asked myself, as I ask you, critter or not? All right, look at it. People are sharp today. People are sharp. So if you haven't voted yet, vote with the majority. Got 88 no's and 21 yeses. And in fact, this is not a critter. I'm actually not sure what it is. I thought it would be easy to identify, and I don't have the photograph showing the top where you can see the radiating hyphae there, but this is a fungus growing on the upper surface of the leaf. And I thought it would be easy, but I wasn't able to identify it yesterday. I haven't given up yet, but I can say it is not a critter. Whereas my first thought was it was some kind of like an eye spot leaf gull like you get on maples, but that wasn't it. Moving right along, here we have boxwood from Charlotte, and you can see this webbing, this fibrous material that is trapping a bunch of debris and leaves in the boxwood shrub. So, are we looking at a critter or not? Wow, the responses are just pouring in here. Once we hit 100 on the yeses, I'm gonna say, yep, this is, you folks are absolutely right. This was a critter, and Matt can say a little bit more.
Yeah, everybody's got it this morning. We got to find some more difficult ones. Actually, Mike, if you don't mind going over the previous one. So just when you see all this webbing with especially silk with all the little pellets, the little bits of frass in it, that's a really good sign that you have a caterpillar. And in this case, it's not a direct pest of the actual boxwoods, although definitely if you start to see webbing and foliage being fed on by green caterpillars, let us know, because there is a new pest of boxwoods was found in Canada. I think last year, the year before, that's been ravaging Europe. It's from Asia, so we're on the lookout for that. But in this case, this little blackish brown caterpillar, and Mike, you can go to the next one if you want again. We find fairly commonly. I still don't know exactly which one it is, but basically these caterpillars collect the debris, the dead leaves, things like that, and feed on those. And so you would see in the previous photo that there was no damage to the green parts of the plant. They look very healthy, but the debris that falls into that, they feed on. So there are debris feeding caterpillars out there. They're not interested in the green parts. They're really just interested in all the dead stuff. That obviously also probably has less chemicals, phytochemicals in it that are protecting the boxwoods normally. So, but great. Everybody is sharp this morning.
And if
there is a question about, is all that brown stuff, I think in the right, is all that frass, or is
most of those little pellets that look like dirt is frass. So they feed on a lot of material, and just to get the nutrients out of that, they're going to have a lot of the fiber and all that stuff coming out of them. So yep, they're messy.
And someone also commented that she has something similar on blueberry.
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to look for any feeding on the green leaves. If you see a lot of the webbing around the base of the plant, near the mulch or, with dead leaves in there. Just break it open, look for the caterpillars. I can help you identify them, and it would be great to rear them at some point. But like I said, there are a lot of caterpillars that feed on debris and dead leaf litter, things like that. And so it's not like all caterpillars feed on green leaves.
And also, if you're looking at webbing like this and not sure if it's insect or spider silk versus fungal hyphae, the fungal hyphae are going to be much more delicate. You won't feel the tough resistance that you do when you try and pull on silk. And also it wouldn't stand up to the heat of the day. It would tend to kind of wither and only be visible in the freshness of the morning. And you wouldn't see it this dense out in the air. You might see it holding a few leaves dangling from a stem, or you might see a more dense mat of mycelium at the base of a stem with something like southern stem blight. But you wouldn't see this much material, this tough, hanging out there in the air.
And there was one more question about it being beneficial. Well, so I mean, in general, decomposers are beneficial because they're, that frass and all that processed material is probably dropping into the ground to enriching the soil a little bit. It's hard to say exactly whether it's really nutrient rich or not, but they're not damaging the plant. And I don't know what the adults are doing. They may be pollinators. They're obviously feeding other things. But these larvae are very well hidden in the silk, so they're likely not being fed on by predators or stuff. So it technically is a detritivore, something that feeds on decaying matter. They are decomposers. They are helping with the nutrient cycling.
All right. And our last question of the day, yellow squash with something on it. Some things on it. So what the world wants to know is critter or not. And once again, the yes votes are pouring in. Should have timed this to see how quickly we get to 100. Oh, we're so close. And I hadn't seen it go down before. I went down from 98 to 99 to 98, back up to 99. So, well, yes, this is a critter. And actually, Matt.
Yeah, so this one, it's a little bit interesting for these because typically you see them all connected in one long line, but these little barrel-like eggs with you can actually see this little round cap right here on the side. Very asymmetrical, very odd looking, but very characteristic of leaf-footed bugs in the genus Leptoglossus, which are the common small brownish leaf-footed bugs that you see around. They lay their eggs on all different surfaces. It's not necessarily that they're pests of this squash, and they will feed on various plants, but we usually don't see them as major pests of a lot of plants. But you do see them. I see them a lot on window screen that they'll lay their eggs, and on twigs and branches and things like that. So it's you just see them around in the environment, not necessarily specifically because it's feeding on that plant.
Now, I may be wrong on this, Matt, but I have for years thought of leaf-footed bugs as a pest on tomatillo, which most years I grow. Do you know one way or the other there?
They may be. I haven't seen a lot of direct damage from them, but they may be. Leaf-footed bugs often feed on seeds through the fruit or through other plants. I know that there's a Leptoglossus that's, for example, specific to the seeds of magnolia, like grandiflora and some of the large fruiting magnolia. And so, I haven't had a lot of people submitting samples where there's really direct damage from leaf-footed bugs, but they'll feed generally on all different plants.
All right.
Yeah, I just don't know what specific damage they're actually causing. They may be on the plants, maybe feeding on actually just the regular plant parts too. But again, I've never been able to see, okay, this is direct leaf-footed bug damage.
Hopefully next year I'll have some tomatillos and we'll see one way or the other. And if so, I will hope to bring it to you. Well, that wraps up Critter or Not, except for the counting. So check yourself, and let's launch a poll here. Let's see, where's our A through E poll? So you should see on your screen up here a poll where you can click A, B, C, D, or E, where you'll indicate the category that you came in as how many you got correct. We will not be able to see on this poll who said what, so there's no embarrassment factor. We will see, though, the distribution of responses, and we'll do that in about 5 seconds. 2, 1, and end the polling and share the results. So can folks see that? We had almost half got all 6 correct. So very good. Congratulations to all of you today.
And condolences to us, because we have to figure out better Critter or Nots next time.
I guess so. But well, we want to encourage people to feel good about themselves as well. So we don't want to make it too hard.
Well, hopefully people still enjoyed it, even though it was not as difficult as some other sessions.
Right, a couple of chat items there, Matt, if you want to mention those, and then I'll jump into the diseases, disorders, and distress.
Yeah. So again, I'd be curious if people are seeing actual damage from them, or if they're just hanging out on the plants, because leaf-footed bugs in that genus are very common everywhere. And I'll see them on plants. I'll even see the young, the nymphs, the very bright red nymphs with black legs, similar looking to wheel bugs. And we've gone over this a few times on plants, pests, pathogens, how to differentiate them. But they are out there and they feed on plants. But leaf-footed bugs are, I don't hear from people and hear around that they're a major problem that people are concerned about. Stink bugs are a bit more of an issue. When they do feed on tomatoes and peppers and things like that, they do leave really direct damage. But again, leaf-footed bugs, I've never been so sure that, okay, that's definitely a leaf-footed bug issue. You need to do something about it. So.
All right.
Yeah.
For the sake of time, then, I'm going to go ahead and jump in because I got quite a few things here, and I need to be efficient so that Matt gets his day in the sun. And I expanded this to talk about current disease, disorders, and distresses, since not all of these are technically diseases. And I want to start out with a picture to help put things in people's toolbox. And I pose the question to you, you can answer in the chat. What would be your hypothesis when you saw this symptom? So what we see here is what we call an interveinal chlorosis. And it seems to be on the upper portions of the leaves of this shrub, which I'm not even sure of what it is. This was at that same park where some of the other photographs came from, but not a natural shrub. This was a planted landscape shrub. Okay, iron deficiency, magnesium deficiency, nutrient, iron and magnesium. Okay, these are good thoughts. It's just the thing that I want to point out, it's just too uniform a chlorosis to be a disease. It's just perfectly between the veins like that. So you want to suspect probably some kind of a nutrient deficiency and probably an immobile nutrient, because the mobile nutrients, someone mentioned magnesium, that I think is mobile. So it's Yeah, right. Magnesium is mobile, so its deficiency is going to appear in the lower leaves because the plant just remobilizes it to the new growth. Whereas some things like iron and other micronutrients won't be able to be remobilized, and you get the symptoms on the new growth. So when you see this absolutely perfect pattern, you're not going to suspect a disease. This is something that certainly suggests a nutrient problem. Here is a photograph, and I know we've talked about these before, but the image just came through or was emailed, I believe, to Matt, or at least it got to him first. And we've talked about these. The homeowner said that some unknown creature laid these pods on their garage door, and that they'd seen them also in the past. But what we're dealing with here is the sporangia of the slime mold Stemonitis. So you can see there are multiple little stems there, and ending up with really these almost fused sporangia producing spores. But the question that I wanted to address was what the agent asked, which is how was she to know? How was she to tell? And the way I would point out two things to help on this. One is look for what's called the hypothallus. So if you look at the very base of at the very base of these sporangia, you can see a sort of a flattened, maybe a little bit shiny material that's kind of stuck to the surface there, and that is the remains of the plasmodium, because these things exist as a multi-nucleate cell wall-less protoplasm that oozes around in the soil, engulfing bacteria and organic matter and so forth until the conditions are right and it triggers it to go into spore production mode. So when it does that, in most cases, it's going to leave a little bit of a residue of that plasmodium down at the base. And so look for that. And the other thing that you can do is to go to our plant specimen pathogens from the recording from June of 2017. And let me put this in the chat so you can link to that. And I talked at length about slime molds in that presentation, and you'll see pictures of what are some of the most common ones that you'll encounter. So knowing and just kind of being familiar with the great variety, but some of the most common ones, then you'll recognize them. That and looking for that hypothallus, that should help you out. Oh, cousin it fungus, gotcha. All right. Last month, someone asked the question or posed the problem of having tried crop rotation and not able to control anthracnose of their beans. So I wanted to spend a moment to talk about that a little bit. We were talking both about anthracnose and Cercospora leaf spot, and so I'll mention both. But here are some photographs, the two on the right, taken here at the clinic. You can see some cotyledons that are getting pretty necrotic, very infected by the fungus Calototricum lindamucianum, causes anthracnose on beans. And you can see a very heavily infected stem that was on a different sample that came into the clinic. The nice photo of the bean pods was from bugwood.org. And you can also get leaf infections on this. You can get it on your dry beans, on your green beans, and even sometimes on lima beans. So, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was who asked the question or mentioned the problem, but they found that crop rotation was ineffective. They had used new seed. They hadn't saved their seed. As you can imagine, in a pod infection like this, you can get infection in the seed, starting to cycle over again when you plant it. But I want to point out a couple of things. One is that there's a very nice reference called the Southeastern U.S. Vegetable Crop Handbook. Let me put the link to that in the chat as well. And this is really geared toward commercial producers, but it's got a lot of information that would be of interest to Extension Master Gardener volunteers and home growers as well. And one of those things of interest would be the tables of alternative management practices. So there's a lot of information about chemicals, most of which won't be available to the homeowner. But these tables may give you some insights. So here it is for disease control in beans, some of the non-chemical control measures. And you'll notice that for anthracnose, which is the first column, there are quite a few practices which are rated as either E excellent or G good for managing them. So avoid field operations when leaves are wet. That's because this fungus has sticky spores that would be splashed around or moved around by handling wet plants. For the same reason, avoiding overhead irrigation, that's just a general good practice when you're trying to reduce bacterial and fungal leaf infections. Crop rotation is also good. Now, you want to have a crop rotation of at least 3 years, so because the fungus can live in the soil, at least one reference I saw, 2 years on the debris. You want that debris to completely break down until you go back and plant again. So if you're just only 1 year away from beans, then that's not going to be enough. Deep plowing, well, in this case, would be turning under the residue. You wouldn't want to compost that residue, of course, unless you know your compost pile is getting nice and hot, which is probably hard to guarantee. Destroying that crop residue, encouraging air movement to increase drying or rapid drying of leaves after rain events, and use of pathogen-free planting material, so clean seed in this case. So there are quite a few things for anthracnose that can help. If we look, though, at Cercospora leaf spot, which was, I think, another one that we talked about, something that you could easily be seeing this time of year, then there are much fewer possibilities of things that are rated excellent. Well, there's one rated excellent, which is the avoid overhead irrigation, and none that are rated good. A lot of these things that were good to excellent for anthracnose are only fair when it comes to Cercospora. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is the fact that the spores are much more easily airborne in the case of Cercospora. They don't have to splash. They could, but they can also be carried on wind currents. So some of the things that would be more effective against anthracnose are not going to be as effective against Cercospora. Now, one thing you notice is not mentioned here is resistant varieties. There are some for anthracnose. I don't know about Cercospora, but a quick check, I didn't see any that were available for the home garden. So commercial lines, yes, there is some resistance there that you can take advantage of. So just be aware that this reference exists and may be useful when you're looking up different kinds of vegetable problems and how to manage them. Changing gears completely and returning to the park where I already showed several photographs. This is the time of year we're going to see lots of mushrooms, and we've been getting some inquiries about them. Please note that the clinic does not do mushroom identification for the table. If people are interested in learning how to identify mushrooms with confidence for being able to eat them, then once the pandemic restrictions have lifted, I would encourage you to join a local mushroom club where you can learn that kind of skill. I just point out this, and I'm not a big macrofungus expert, but I do want to point out this particular common fairy ring mushroom that we may be seeing. This is probably what's called Chlorophyllum molybdtes. Now, the chlorophyllum would be the green gills, but notice that they're not present when the fungus is not quite mature yet. So once these get bigger, then you'd have the distinctive green tinge to the underside, to the gills there, and a green spore print. So you might be fooled. In fact, this happened a few years ago, as I recall. Someone ate some of these thinking that it was as an edible species. Another thing that we'll be seeing in our flower beds are going to be spots on the leaves and on the petals of zinnia. Although there is a bacterial leaf spot, I tend to see most or all of it being alternaria in my own garden, or I should say in my wife's zinnias. So this is a fungal leaf spot that also can be seed-borne. It's one of the ones you're going to want to destroy that crop residue again. A similar situation as with the anthracnose on bean, that this will survive a couple of years on the residue, 2 years on the residue, but can survive up to 7 years in the seed. So you would not want to be saving seed from from this kind of a plant. And with that, jump into the be on the lookouts for this next coming month of September. So lots of powdery mildew will be coming on as we go into the fall, and secondary leaf spots at the leaf senesce, and some of these weaker fungi, Tubackia included, although we talked about that as a possible primary leaf spot on a previous program, but you'll start seeing more of those. The important thing to remember is with deciduous trees and shrubs, these kind of leaf spots are not going to be serious issues. They're going to drop those leaves in a couple of months anyway and produce new ones next fall. So in most cases, these are a cosmetic issue. Phytophthora root rot and Armillaria root rot are always possibilities when we see trees that are declining, shrubs that are declining and dying back. And I have the asterisk there because we are now going to be entering into the time of year where here in North Carolina, we can see sometimes, not always, the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms associated with Armillaria root rot. This is our only plant pathogen in our area that will produce a true mushroom. You can see the clusters of honey-colored mushrooms there illustrated or photographed on the right. Again, you're not always going to be present. These are not always going to be present in and around an infected tree or shrub, but when they are, it's a helpful diagnostic sign of the fungus. Bacterial leaf scorch on red oak, sycamore, and redbud. There's a lot of this. We've got the Centennial Parkway going between the Farmers Market and Centennial Campus there. And if you're driving down that, you can look on the side of it. Don't distract yourself from driving, but if you're a passenger, take a look at the oak trees on both sides of the road there, and you'll see symptoms of this. It almost looks like fall coming on already. So that is something that is a xylem inhabiting bacterium transmitted by, yes, sharpshooter leafhoppers. So harking back to our first picture in the critter or not. Cercospora and Corynespora leaf spots on hydrangea would be pretty much everywhere. Cercospora leaf spots being the smaller ones with the whiter centers, and the Corynespora being larger and more uniformly dark, although there may be some, as you can see there, it looks like there's some concentric, slightly darker and lighter markings. Shot hole on flowering cherry and cherry laurel that could be mistaken for insect feeding, but are actually the infected spots dropping out of the leaf. Rhizosphere needle cast on spruce, and of course boxwood blight. So be definitely on the lookout for these as we go into the end of summer and get into the beginning of fall. Very quickly on some of our fruits, the apple, same things that we would be looking for in August: black rot, bitter rot in the fruit, and then the superficial sooty blotch and fly speck on the fruits. And Pierce's disease in grape is the same organism or a different strain of the one that causes the bacterial leaf scorch in the shade trees. So we got this picture. Well, this picture came from actually physical sample of grape that came in this month and tested positive for Xylella fastidiosa, the bacterium that causes that. Black rot on grape, again, remember on vinifera grapes, that's going to be something on the fruit, and on muscadine, it's going to be a leaf spotting fungus. If you have pecans, you'll be seeing powdery mildew and scab, or you should be on the lookout for those. The veggies, things are winding down, of course, but the downy mildew and powdery mildew on cucurbits, and I'll say something about that in a moment, but I've used the photograph here from actually a pumpkin sample that had downy mildew on the leaves, and the spots are rounder, they're not as angular as they are with cucumber, and I'll say something about that in just a moment here. And of course with cucurbits we could be seeing fruit rots as well. Tomato leaf spot still, septoria, and now gray leaf spot, and possibility of late blight to keep an eye out for, and growth cracks as you see in the photograph on the lower right. Anthracnose in beans and Cercospora leaf spot, we've already mentioned a little bit of detail on those. And basil downy mildew, I've been kind of keeping an eye out on basils and haven't seen anything that looked too suspicious lately, so I'm not sure what's happening there. So just yesterday, a pest alert came out about a find of pumpkin downy mildew in Surrey County. And what's interesting here is that there's actually a couple of different, they're called clades, but you can think of it as strains of the downy mildew organism on cucurbits, one of which tends to go to squash, including pumpkin and watermelon, and the other is more toward cucumbers and cantaloupes. So we had the one here reported recently that was found in Surrey County that was the clade that goes on the more on the pumpkins and squash. So please read, and I'll put this in the chat as well. Please read this alert, because this is a disease where we want to try and take a community approach. Your vegetable garden could be producing the inoculum, the sporangia that the downy mildew fungus uses to spread to new locations, and therefore posing a risk to commercial production fields. So take a look at that alert if you would, so that you're up to date on that for you and for any clients who call. Resuming our bolos in the flower beds, Phytophthora aerial blight and root rot on annual vinca, also called Madagascar periwinkle, Catharanthus roseus. Haven't seen a lot of that lately, but do keep an eye out for it. Photograph there in the upper right. Powdery mildew, of course, would be going strong. We see it a lot on Coreopsis, on ironweed, sedum, zinnia, lower right there, zinnia, and more. Rust on asters and ironweed, leaf blotch or measles on peony, and of course, Septoria leaf spot on our black-eyed Susan. You can see the photograph in the center at the bottom. The turf grass, if this looks just like the same slide I presented in August, it is basically pretty much the same suite of diseases that you want to be on the lookout for in your turf. So fairy rings, brown patch on the cool season turfs, large patch on the warm season turf, gray leaf spot on fescue and St. Aug, and rust on a couple of different species of turf. Check out the turf files page there for more information on any of these. With that, I will take any questions quickly so that we can turn it over to Matt and hear about some critters. See, there was a question about the, yes, there is a copy online of the vegetable handbook there. So that whole thing can be downloaded as a PDF and either referred to directly from the internet, or you can download it. All right, nothing else. So Matt, take it away.
Great, thanks a lot, Mike. All right. So today I'm going to talk about just a couple of the subjects that I've been getting a lot of questions about lately. So hopefully everybody can see this, see the presentation. All right. So we got this critter here. And I have gotten several emails about this, asking if it's some new exotic mosquito or just a giant mutant mosquito or something like that. Just because it has a strep proboscis doesn't mean it's a bloodsucker or a mosquito. So today I'm going to talk about robber or assassin flies. These are in the order Diptera, the true flies, and the family Acilidae. Now, traditionally, they've been called robber flies. But my friend, an expert, a world expert on them, suggests they should be called assassin flies because they don't really rob things, more they assassinate them by flying in the air and capturing them. But I'll let you be the chooser of what common name you call them. It's one of the most diverse families of true flies. There are over 1,000 species in the US and Canada, over 7,000 species in the world. So it's a very large group of flies. And physically, they are very small to very large predatory flies. In fact, the largest ones are well over 2 inches long and are giants among flies. Most are generalists, but some specialize in prey. There are a few very thin grass-like ones that actually fly around and capture spiders out of their webs. But otherwise, they're fairly generalist predators. The larvae live in soil or in rotting wood and are also predators, and I'll show you them in a second. And both the larvae and the adults have venom. And so, you know, they're not aggressive, but if you were to grab one and not know what it was, they're basically the only fly that can bite you in defense, and they'll jab you with that proboscis. And they do have a painful venom. And as you'll see why they have that in a second. So what makes a robber fly a robber fly? So, you know, to distinguish them, they typically have the large eyes, very large to very large compared to the rest of the head, usually with a distinct depression in between them. This is fairly characteristic of the family. They also have what's called a mystax, or a beard. You know, some species have a much more reduced one, but others have this face that looks very beard-like. They also have a pointed proboscis and very large, robust legs that are spiny, and this is so they can grab their prey. Okay, like I said, they like other flies, they have a worm-like, maggot-like stage called the larva. So here's a robber fly larva that was actually sent in from somebody to the clinic, and it pupated, and I was able to get off this very nice robber fly, male robber fly off of it. So again, larvae are going to be usually in the soil. They often feed on things like other insect larvae and soft-bodied organisms. And because they have venom, they can take down prey that's as large as them or even a little bit larger. And they've actually been known to be a good biocontrol of, say, white grubs in pastures and places like that. Here's a close-up of the larval head. It's not much, just this little cone, but they do have kind of fangs that they use to inject venom into their prey. And as far as prey goes, like I said, they're very generalists. So here's a tiny robber fly eating a queen ant, and the ant, though, is obviously fairly big compared to it. But even the huge robber flies will nail these really tiny little prey items. So this is like a little Drosophila fly that this large robber fly grabbed. I don't even know how they actually grab those tiny ones, but it's really kind of amazing. But also what's amazing is when they take down much larger prey. So this is one of the flies I'll be mentioning in a minute, but taking down a very large dragonfly. They're even so large and venomous that there are accounts of them taking down hummingbirds. So that's right. That's one of my favorite facts to tell people, is that there are flies that will prey on birds. Of course, very small birds and very large flies, but it does happen. Okay, so a couple of the specific ones that I'd like to talk to you about. These are ones that are very common and you're going to be seeing around. This one I get a lot of questions about. This is the genus Diogmites. They're called hanging thieves because they will often grab prey with their hind legs and hang off of vegetation or sticks with their front legs. Very, not very hairy, fairly sleek looking, but kind of spidery, very long legs, orange to reddish colored. Very, you know, the faces, other than this mustache, they have very few setae on their face, but it's fairly large. They're about an inch long body size, so they can be quite surprising. And again, this is the one that most people think it looks like a mutated mosquito or some exotic pest, but we have a number of species here and they are very common. Holcocephala are called gnat ogres. That's because they're very tiny. They are basically our smallest robber fly around here. You can see this one on a blade of grass, how tiny it is. And this one has nailed one of those and jabbed one of those frit flies, a chloropid fly. These are the little tiny flies that are like called eye gnats also. If you're out in the summer and they swarm around you, you know how tiny those flies are. So this one has grabbed one of those. There are several species and genera of robber flies that look like bees. So Laphria have a little bit longer antennae than Mellophora, which has fairly short antennae, but both can be robust and bee-like or hornet-like, and many of them are actually bee or hornet mimics. And these are very large flies. I'll show you one in a second compared to a hornet. The genus Epheria is very common. They often perch on twigs and sticks around in bushes. Not all of them have it, but many of them have these white patches or rings on their abdomen. And otherwise, they're fairly brown and muted colored. but this is a common genus, and they're decent sized flies. They're ½ inch to an inch sometimes, this one. And lastly, one of the giants around here, the red-legged cannibal fly, Promachus rufipes. This is a very large fly, and we've actually been getting a lot of them being submitted as possible Asian giant hornets. So of course, it's not at all a hornet, it's not even a wasp. Flies only have 2 wings. You can actually see the 2 wings here, and then these little drumsticks behind on the thorax are actually the hind wings of flies, which are reduced in these structures called halteres. You can see the halteres here, and then the regular wings right here. But because of this banding yellow and black pattern, they're often mistaken for hornets. Of course, that's probably on purpose for them. But they are very large, well over an inch long. Here's a mating pair I found recently on a twig. And when they're flying around like that, they're even larger, of course. They're about 2 to 3 inches total. And when they're flying around, they look a little crazy. But they are definitely not hornets, and they're most definitely not Asian giant hornets. And so, but you can see why people might mistake them. So here is an Asian giant hornet, and here is one of those, these are 2 of those types of robber flies, and you can see how big they are. They are, in fact, very large flies, and probably could and can definitely take down hornets as well. So these large predatory flies are around. They're not a concern. You know, if you leave them alone, if you don't grab them or anything like that, you can observe them safely. And they're very interesting flies. In fact, a lot of amateurs really like robber flies because they're so charismatic and large. Okay, I'm in full screen, so I can't see the chat, so I'm not sure if there are any questions right now, but I'm going to move on since we have a little bit of time. And I've been getting a lot of questions about worms too. So I just want to talk about a few worms, especially ones that I've been getting a lot more questions about. So although many animals are called worms, like rootworms and armyworms and things like that. Okay, so I had to see something in the chat. Let's see, what do we got?
And the question was, robber flies, where do they nest?
So robber flies don't nest technically. They will mate, and then the female will go lay her eggs either in rotten wood or in the soil. So one of those pictures I showed before showed a really long ovipositor on a female. She was looking at dead trees, and the larvae then go into the dead wood and feed on beetle larvae specifically, and things like that. Others will just lay their eggs right in the soil, and the larvae will hatch and burrow around looking for their prey, but they don't actually have a nest. Okay, good question, thanks. Okay, so as far as the worms go, you know, like I said, there's a lot of insects that are called worms, like rootworms and cabbage worms, things like that, but true worms, there are only a few that you're going to see in the gardens. The first are going to be in the phylum Annelida. These are specifically called oligochaetes, and they're commonly called earthworms. And there are lots and lots of species. In fact, I have a nice key here. I think I can add that to the chat real quick. It's a little pictorial key for some earthworms that are around. It doesn't include the one that I'm going to be talking about today. But there's lots and lots of earthworms around. There's also some flatworms in the phylum Platyhelminthes, and specifically the family Geoplanidae. These are called land planarians or flatworms in general. So earthworms feed on organic matter and leaf litter, whereas the flatworms are actually predators of small soft organisms, including earthworms, slugs, and other small soft invertebrates. So the one I get a lot of calls about and a lot of concern about, and in fact there was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, there definitely was one in the Atlantic, is about the jumping or crazy worms, the Asian jumping worms. These are worms in the genus Amynthis, and Agrestis is the species that is most commonly attributed, although we have a few established in the US. They're native to Asia. And actually, I went back and looked at the literature. They've been known since at least 1978 in North Carolina. There was a nice paper on the earthworms of Tennessee that states that, from 1978, that states that they're definitely known in North Carolina. These are large species, about 3 to 6 inches long. They have an erratic behavior, so they'll jump violently when disturbed. So if you try and catch one, they'll flip out literally, and cause you to kind of let go. But that's kind of one of the behavioral characteristics. Otherwise, they're basically a taupe brown with iridescence. You can see in this picture, you can see the iridescence nicely, but not all pictures. I'll show you the next picture. They don't look as iridescent. And they have this pale clitellum or saddle that is not raised above the body. They also have these complete rings of setae around them, and they have a number of other characteristics. But here's another picture of one. You can see that kind of beige brown color, not really red or anything like that. The clitellum, again, the saddle is basically in contour with the rest of the body, and it's very pale. And you can see these rings of setae around the segments. So again, this is one that's very concerning, but really there's not much you can do about them. They are going into the news a lot lately because, you know, people think of earthworms as being beneficial, but they're starting to be seen, especially since many of our earthworms that are here are not native, they're starting to be seen more as actually a non-benefit for the environment, especially because specifically these earthworms live above the ground, unlike other earthworms, and feed on leaf litter and stuff like that, which causes a reduction in the vital nutrients that are on top of the soil, and they also reduce the amount of litter on surfaces, and so they can be an issue. Let's see, we have some chat questions. Let's see. How many earthworms in North Carolina are native versus non-native? Well, I did a quiz last year, and I think it's only about, you know, in the U.S. in general, I think the majority, or about 60% of the earthworm species, are non-native. Should you kill them if you find them? You can, or you can sell them for fish bait, but it's not going to do much for getting rid of them in wide areas. So it's really an uphill battle. And again, they've been here for decades, so they're here. So it's really difficult to control them now, but we do get a lot of questions about that. And a lot of people think that there's some new thing, but just know that they are around and they can be an issue. Now moving on, trying to get through this quickly. There are a lot of flatworms too. Again, these are very different than earthworms. They're a completely different phylum. One you'll see is the hammerhead, one of the hammerhead flatworms. This brownish one with this dark collar and this very thin dorsal line, straddled by two thicker lines, is going to be Bipalium cuense. They can get very large, close to a foot long sometimes, but very thin. They will infest areas where there's high humidity or moisture. They can actually be pests of vermicompost because, again, they do feed on earthworms. And one thing I learned recently is these hammerhead flatworms actually contain tetrodotoxin, which is the toxin that is in pufferfish, the famous toxin in pufferfish. So don't eat them, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. Another one that we've seen actually is another genus, Diversibipalium multilineatum. Again, you can see it's a little bit different. The lines are very thin. All three lines are thin, and there's no collar, and this one middle line goes across the head or further in the head. But again, functionally very similar. These things are established. There's really not much that can be done about getting rid of them that's effective. Note, though, that we do have other flatworms around. They're not the hammerhead ones. This is a long-established or native species, Microplanet terrestris. So it's just out there. It's been here for ages. But there are similar flatworms that we are on the lookout for. In fact, a couple weeks ago, we got a new one from a nursery. This is possibly a newly introduced species that we have sent off for verification with DNA molecular identification at the federal level, and we're hoping to see what it is back and confirm it. But we're trying to catch these things as they come in. And one of the ones we're really on the lookout for, and it was actually, this one was sent in because of it, and it's kind of similar, is actually called the New Guinea flatworm, which is now established in Florida. This is Platydemus manaquari. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But these are similar color to those other ones, except they have this very broad pale stripe down the back, two prominent eyes, and the underbelly is actually a tanned pinkish color, so much more drastic than the other one. It's not yet in North Carolina, but again, be on the lookout for these. You can always send photos. Clear photos are actually a pretty good way, and if you can get a photo of the underside, that actually works well too.
Excuse me, Matt, you've got a couple of questions there in the chat.
Sure. Okay, let's see the chat. Okay, are these toxic worms a danger for chickens? That I don't know exactly, and or dogs. That I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much poison they actually have in them, and I'm not sure how susceptible birds versus mammals are to that toxin. So that's a good question, and I will try and look up some information and let you know. Okay, now just something fun. Okay, count the papilio. Anybody want to? This was kind of a fun Where's Waldo kind of thing, I figured. So if you just put in the chat box how many butterflies you see on my lantana here, they're all over the place. I'm getting a lot of hummingbirds, a lot of other things. This is kind of an eye wash for all those robber flies and flatworms and things like that. See some pretty flowers. So if you feel like putting in the chat how many you think you see. And you may find one that I didn't find. I don't know. Okay. I thought this was going to just be a little fun exercise. Let's see. It's really hard in full presenter mode to see the chat box, just by the way. So, okay, we got a lot of numbers. Let's see. Okay, thanks for the participation. Okay, I counted, and maybe somebody can point out where another one was, but I counted 4 on this one. So now look around again. I may have fooled myself, but I see 4 of them. But I have another lantana across the yard, and it had another 3 or 4 on it as well. So there were a lot. Okay, and as I was walking yesterday, I found another one that would be fun. Okay, count the cicada shed skins on this tree. Keep your eyes exercised. I'm hoping everybody has a nice time interacting. And after this, I'll talk about some bolos, and then we'll let Charlotte talk about a couple plants. Okay, so how many do we got? Now, 6s, 8s. Now, keep in mind the other tree in the back actually had some in other angles, but okay. So we got a lot of answers, but I was able to count 6 of them, or yeah, no, how many is that? 6 of them. I can't count this morning. Yep, you got some up here, you got 2 up here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and 1 down here. So this tree was loaded with the shed skins of the last nymphal instar after it crawled up under the tree and came out to be, of course, cicadas. So that's on the bolos. So I've been seeing a lot of cicadas around, a lot of cicada shells everywhere. They're going to continue to emerge and be singing loudly. Of course, this also brings cicada killers. I've talked about the last few times about how they differ from Asian giant hornets and such. But I even had at my light the other night a cicada killer come where there was also a cicada. Keep on the lookout if you've got prunus species. Keep on the lookout for peach tree borers, especially the females. This female is probing the ground to lay eggs around trees that are susceptible, and their young larvae will then hatch before the season is over and start to bore into the tree. And this is actually when the critical timing is to scout for them and try to prevent them from coming in the trees by applying some kind of pesticide. We're also seeing a lot of caterpillars now this time of year, especially things like armyworms. I've been talking a lot about different caterpillars over the last couple of sessions, especially some of the tree caterpillars, but we've been seeing a lot of armyworms. including this is yellow striped armyworm for obvious reasons. It's got these very large yellow stripes. This is fall armyworm, which you may be seeing in fescue lawns and can cause a lot of damage. And this is called the sweet potato armyworm. So armyworms are a big group of fairly large caterpillars generally that attack a wide variety of plants. The yellow striped armyworms are very common in vegetable gardens right now, feeding on a few different types of plants, whereas the fall armyworms would be, for the homeowner, could be specific to fescue turf rather than any of the other crops, although they do, of course, feed on corn as well. This is the time of year to start looking for bagworms and removing them. So again, cut the tie off from the branch and unwrap it. That's going to keep it from girdling the branch. We start seeing more big spiders. I had this very large orb weaver setting up shop outside of my door, and they are harmless. Just leave them. They're good catching lots of things and eating them, and they're really fun to watch, I think. So if you can stand it, leave them. If you can't, I'm not sure I have good advice for you, because I enjoy spiders and I think they're nice to look at and interesting to have around. And finally, lots of fall blooms are going to be visited by lots of different insects, especially the goldenrods that's out there. It's one of my favorite plants to go to find all different types of insects, including here's a scoliid wasp and here's a blister beetle. So these plants, a lot of different fall flowers are going to be attracting a lot of different insect pollinators right now. Okay. So what are the 4 black spots on the orb weaver? Whoops. Let's see. Let me go back up to that slide real quick. The 4 black spots. So they are, I forget what the term is, but a lot of spiders have those, and it's, I think, where muscles attach in the spider. But that's a really good question. A lot of spiders will have these little dimples, and I think that's what that is here. And they have some weird special name, but I can't think of it right this second. But good question. And that's all I have for now. Please let me know if you have any questions, and then we'll hear from Charlotte.
If I may, Matt, there was a question in the chat that I didn't see earlier until you had already started yours. It was from Beatriz Rodriguez, who asked about what kind of fungus causes fairy rings. And there are actually, according to the Turf Files site, there are over 60 different species of fungi that have been associated with fairy rings in turf. Now, some of these will produce mushrooms, others will produce puffballs. But I'll put the link here in the chat box to that particular page in Turf Files where you can see more about fairy rings. And so now Matt, it's public service here. People know now not to eat fairy ring mushrooms and puffballs, and not to eat hammerhead flatworms.
Yeah, that sounds like a tasty meal, I know, but just keep yourselves from doing that at all costs.
All right, thank you guys. Thanks for those tips. I know this time of year I always get tired of the vegetables that we've been eating all summer, but I'm going to try to refrain from seeking some more exotic alternatives like flatworms. So we're going to finish up with our weed of the month and our plant of the month. I see lots of people answering in the chat if you've seen this weed, and I'm seeing lots of A's. So this is a weed that's really common, especially this time of year. And so we're seeing lots of people are seeing it everywhere. It is called spotted spurge, Euphorbia maculata. Sometimes you will see the genus listed as, and I don't know how to pronounce this, so I'm going to pretend it's Chamaecyparis maculata. And this is in the spurge family, which is the Euphorbiaceae. And like many members of that family, when you break the stems, it does have a white sap. And for some people, that is a skin irritant. So you might want to be careful handling these weeds if you are sensitive to that white sap. As you see, it's a very low-growing, mat-forming weed. It really hugs the ground. It has these little tiny leaves, and they're arranged opposite of each other on the stems. The stems themselves can be green or purple. Purple or red. It can be kind of a colorful-looking plant with those red stems, and sometimes the leaves take on a purplish hue. And I think this is really interesting. Unlike many of our weeds, when we really talk about weeds, pesty weeds, a lot of them come to us from other parts of the world, but the spotted spurge is actually from the United States. It's native to most of the country. But it has become a weed in many other countries in the world. So this is one we've actually exported. It is a warm season annual, it loves heat, which is why this time of the year it gets to be so prevalent. It's just really happy and thriving in our warm weather. It's very drought tolerant too, so even in dry years, it does extremely well. And it loves to grow in hot, sunny spots. So you see it here growing among rocks. It loves that. It loves to be in mulch or rocks, or it can be a turf weed, but it's more commonly a weed of pathways and landscape beds. You could get it in a vegetable garden. It's not so much a huge competitor for resources, so I wouldn't consider it to be a bad weed, like a weed that's going to harm production in crops or be that damaging to other plants. But for a lot of people, it's just a visual nuisance. There is actually a really closely related species, and it can be quite difficult to tell the two apart. In a lot of ways, it doesn't really matter exactly which one you have because the way you would manage it is exactly the same. They are both native. There's the true spotted spurge, which will often have this little purple dot on the leaf, and the leaf tends to be more oblong. In fact, that species name, maculata, actually means spotted. So when you see plants with that species name, they often have spots somewhere on the plant. And then there's what's called prostrate spurge, the Euphorbia prostrata. Very, very similar, grows flat on the ground. It can have more of a rounded leaf, kind of a bluish colored leaf. It often doesn't have the spot, but absence or presence of the spot is not necessarily what identifies the difference between these two plants, because spotted spurge doesn't always have the spot. But again, like I said, they are extremely similar. They're both warm season annuals. So knowing exactly which species you have is not that critical, because management is pretty much the same. It's exactly the same, actually. So the important thing to think about managing any weed is what is its growth habit and cycle. So this is a warm season annual. It germinates in spring and summer, flourishes in heat. Like many weeds in the Euphorbiaceae, just like we talked about last month with chamber bitter, is also in this family. It comes up and grows quickly and flowers and sets seeds at a very young age. This plant can start flowering in 3 to 4 weeks from germination. And it ripens those seeds pretty much immediately. They drop to the ground and germinate. The seeds don't need to have a dormancy period or a cold period. So you can have just a couple of weeds in June, and by August you have hundreds, lots more. So it can build up pretty quickly. So our control strategies when we're talking about these warm season annual weeds, in the wintertime, we would be looking at mulch. And again, with mulch and annual weeds, what you're trying to do is bury the seed so they don't get exposed to light. Most seeds need light to trigger germination, so you want a good, solid 2 to 3 inch deep layer of mulch to keep them in the dark. Pre-emergents work fairly well on this, so there are some pre-emergents available for landscape and turf areas, things like preen, pendulum. Of course, always check your label directions and follow them for your site and how you apply them. There are several other herbicide products listed in the Turf Files fact sheet on this weed if you're looking for management in turf grass. So the link is one of the things I'll send in our follow-up email. But at this time of the year, after this plant's germinated and it's up and growing, and it's really annoying you with its presence, what you want to do is stay on top of it. If it's a small area and you can hand weed, anything you can do to stop it from producing more seeds, because that'll build the population up this year, and as well, some of those seeds will just sit around and wait for next year. So you can see the seedlings when they come up, They come up and they have that same kind of shaped leaf and quickly start growing. So if you can either hand pull those seedlings when they're small, or use a herbicide. When they're small like this, any of our non-selective herbicides will be good if you just carefully apply it. So the organic products will work on small seedlings. As it gets bigger, you might need to use something that is systemic, that is actually absorbed into the plant. That would be things like glyphosate. So your selection of product is going to depend on how large the weed is to some extent. And of course, once any weed gets large in that flowering stage, all of our herbicides are going to be less effective. So you want to concentrate your control on that young stage. If you just have a lot of larger flowering weeds that already have seeds on them, your best option is to dedicate a little time to hand weeding. So you see this plant does have little tiny white flowers, and then the seeds, here's a new seed that's just set really quickly on the plant and ripen. So when you start to see it have those little, kind of like little balls all along the stems, you know it's got lots of seeds on it. So if you can pull it and remove it from the garden, that's going to give you the best control. And not only for this year, but for future years as well. And one thing it is definitely worth knowing about these weeds, both the spotted and the prostrate spurge, is they are the most common summer annual weeds in container nurseries. So we often bring these into our landscapes with plants we purchase and bring home. So make sure anytime you're bringing any new plant into the landscape, you inspect it, inspect the potting mix, and pull out any weeds that are there. And then there may have been seeds there as well. So after you plant it, you definitely want to keep watching these plants for the next 3 or 4 weeks to see if any new weeds sprout around them, and pull those really quickly. So when you water newly planted plants, you're often going back and doing that pretty frequently after they go back into the ground. Always make sure to look for any weeds that are sprouting and pull them out, and that can help you prevent or remove any new weeds that you may have brought in. All right, and now our plants of the month. And of course, with our plants of the month feature, we are looking at landscape plants that do more, and we know plants do a lot for us. And Niche, which is the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture, has a great series of infographics that you can download, you can post on social media, that talk about all the things that plants do for us. So I wanted to call that out and mention to you. And you can just search National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture and find the website and find those infographics that are available to use. So one thing plants do for us is feed pollinators. They also help build the soil and stabilize the soil. And this week's, or this month's, plant of the month is actually a grass, native grass, switchgrass, also known as panic grass, Panicum virgatum. This is actually the plant, that there's been a lot of research for producing ethanol, so biofuels, that type of thing. But as a landscape plant, it has tremendous advantages. It is native to most of the United States except for the Pacific Coast states. And out in the central United States, it's a primary component of the tallgrass prairies. Here in our area, we tend to see it more in the eastern half of the state, but it definitely grows across the state. A lot of times in pine woods and savannas, and even in brackish marshes it can occur. It will thrive, as you can imagine, something with that wide of a range is very adapted to a lot of conditions. So it mainly needs sun, like most grasses, and it will thrive from dry to wet soil. So very adaptable for soil conditions, sand or clay. It's happy. And it is long-lived and tends to be clump forming. Those clumps get a little bigger each year. It is both drought and flood tolerant, which makes it work really well in rain gardens. So if you're looking something for a rain garden, it is a good plant, really great plant for that. The fibrous root system, as most grasses have, helps stabilize soil. So it's good on slopes if you did a mass planting to keep soil in place. It is deer resistant like many of our grasses. And slightly salt tolerant. So it's something that could be used at the coast, although I wouldn't put it somewhere that got a lot of salt spray frequently. So of course it has tremendous benefits and good points to it, but there is one drawback worth mentioning, especially if you're thinking about fire-wise landscaping, and wildfires can be an issue here in North Carolina. Like many grasses, it does have a high flammability rating, which means it catches fire really quickly and burns pretty hot. So if you do live in an area that's at risk for wildfire, this is not something you would want to put really close to your house. Something to keep in mind. And there are many varieties, cultivars. This one in the picture is named Thundercloud. I have not personally grown it, but it's one I'm on the lookout for because it seems to have a lot of nice attributes as far as being strongly upright. It's quite a tall one. I think it reaches 7 or 8 feet. So that is one that's gotten a lot of praise and good reviews. Here's just a couple of views of switchgrass at different times of the season. So you can see in the summer it gets these little airy pink flowers, and then those develop into little tan seeds. Birds will feed on those seeds during winter, so it's got a really nice kind of summer presence. In the spring, of course, it's just coming up. There's not a lot there because it's a pretty low care plant, but the one thing you do need to do is cut it back in the winter. So go in around January, February, just whenever it starts to get messy looking, and cut it back to about 4 or 6 inches from the ground, and it'll totally grow back out by summer and be full and blooming. Then in the fall, it can take on really nice golden shades and then ages to a nice kind of tan color that has a good winter presence in the garden, and often stands up quite well, into January, February. Maybe if we get some snow and ice, that tends to break it apart. And in fact, there's at least 15 different cultivars available, and they have a variety of heights, ranges from 4 feet to 8 feet or even more. So they tend to be all fairly upright in their growth habit, some taller than others. And this is one of my favorite. It's named Prairie Fire, but there are several cultivars available with this kind of reddish foliage. These tend to come up green or bluish green in the spring, but over the summer they get more and more of these red and purple tones. So by this time of the year, they're almost completely red, which looks, very autumnal, and blends nicely with a lot of different flowering plants. Another thing I like about Prairie Fire, which again tends to be characteristic with a lot of the more red tinted ones, is they're a little bit shorter. For me, this one's 3 feet, but then of course 4 feet in flower. So it's not as large as some of the others that I love the bigger ones too, but you need more space for them. So that's one that I personally have a couple of different plants in my garden and really enjoy. And then of course the ecological value for things like switchgrass includes the fact that the seeds are eaten by songbirds. It is the larval host, so you might find some caterpillars on it of wood nymphs, and some of the skipper butterflies, especially the banded skippers. And it can provide excellent cover year-round, especially when you have more mass plantings of it. So it's good cover for a lot of different wildlife. So a lot of value in the landscape and a lot of value to beneficials. There's a question about will it self-seed. Some cultivars do self-seed more than others, is what I've noticed in my garden. The seedlings, are pretty noticeable and easy to pull up, but it will self-seed some. You'll get some seedlings coming up, especially for me. Cloud9 has been a prolific self-seeder, and North Wind, but I don't get these red-leafed ones self-seeding, or have not had that yet. More of the bluish or green-leafed ones. That's a really good tip from Susan. Thank you for sharing that switchgrass is toxic to horses, so don't let it get into your pastures. All right, so we are going to finish up. I'm just going to see if I missed anything else in the chat. So there's a question about getting rid of clover in the yard. So I would recommend for weeds in your turf to definitely visit Turf Files, the Turf Files website. There are a lot of good weed profiles and fact sheets there. And so just to finish up, if you're not already subscribed to our email list and would like to get announcements about webinars like Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, and the follow-up emails that go out, which will include all of the links that have been shared in the chat today, you can subscribe online, and I'll get that and put it in the chat in just a minute. It is now a Google group, and it is kind of a managed group, so it's announcement only, so you don't have to worry about getting a lot of replies that people, sometimes send to messages. And when you do subscribe, you should get a confirmation email, but if you don't see that in your inbox, you'll want to check the spam. And we will close out with our announcement for next month, which we look forward to seeing you all back September 22nd. And we're really fortunate. We'll have Lucy Bradley and Kathleen Moore joining us. Of course, Lucy is our urban horticulture specialist, and Kathleen Moore works with the urban horticulture program and has been a project manager for things like the Extension Gardener Handbook and curriculum and the plant toolbox. And they are going to be talking about using the Extension Gardener plant toolbox to find the right plant for the site. And you can certainly catch up with past episodes and learn all kinds of interesting things by going to our playlist on YouTube. And you can find our current schedule as well at the links listed here. And we will hit our music to play us out. And just say how much we appreciate everybody joining in today, and hope you all have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next month. All right. Thank you all. I'm just going to grab that link I mentioned and drop it in the chat. So if you're not on our email list, you can get those messages.
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks everyone for attending. We enjoyed it too.
We did.
Absolutely.
Have a great month.
Yes. And Mike, I can't believe you didn't know Critter or Not was the highest rated quiz show in among Master Gardener volunteers. Just
Oh.
Oh, I thought it was everywhere, even more than Jeopardy.
Well, it may have spread beyond. We need to start tracking these things. We might need to think about trademarking it or something.